go live and stuff. I was like, you know what? It's always good to do so.
Sure. I'll give you the link. All right. We are live. Hello and welcome to Fresh Off the Dome, your topic-based podcast. That's all killer, no filler. Just getting to the topic and just having a good discussion about it. It's been a while, but I couldn't think of a more better episode to come back on. Turns out there's 17 of these in total, so that's kind of crazy for me. But I am joined by my good friend, returning, Ben Bellevue.
Hello.
Also returning, Jon Ferguson.
Hey.
And our first timer, Jakejames Lugo.
Hey, what's happening, people?
And this topic is about Star Wars. Just Star Wars in general. This has been the topic obviously since I wanted to talk about since The Last Jedi, because that's been a hot topic for everybody. But I know Ben was one of the first people who was wanted to jump on board and have this discussion. Yeah. So I'm so glad
at the Giants game. Were you there?
No, I couldn't make it, unfortunately.
I got into a shouting match about The Last Jedi.
At the Giants game?
Yeah.
Wow.
We were fighting.
As one does.
I get passionate very easily.
Oh, believe me, I know you, so this is not a surprise.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I just want to talk about Star Wars in general. Where are we feeling about it? Are we up to date about it? Because I know last time I talked to you, JJ, Solo was just about to come out, and you were lukewarm about that. Have you watched it now? What are your feelings of Star Wars now?
I've already seen it twice now, as far as Solo. So I've seen all the new Star Wars movies about multiple times at this point.
Okay. And John, I'm not really sure where you're at as far as Star Wars. Are you a huge fan or casual fan?
So I love the movies. Basically, the way I got into Star Wars was when I was 4 years old. My dad sat me down and we watched A New Hope together, and that's kind of been our thing for the last 25 years or so. Is that whenever a new Star Wars movie comes out, we go see it together, and so it's this big bonding experience for me. And the movies are super important to me. So that's I've seen all of them and have thoughts about them. That's for sure.
Okay. And Ben, Star Wars history for you, how has that been for you?
Yeah, I've grown up watching Star Wars. My dad's a huge Star Wars fan. He's a big nerd. He has a Jedi tattoo on his arm now. And it was one of the first things he introduced me to as a kid. It was one of the first things we really bonded over. And for, there are other things we connect on, particularly nerdier, media consumption things. But Star Wars is definitely that pillar of it, where it's a very important part of my relationship with my dad. So it's a huge part of my life.
And JJ, I know you're a huge fan. Where's your beginning with that?
For me, my whole family is big into Star Wars. For us, it's a family event every time either a new movie comes out in theaters or one of the more recent cases, besides the newer movies coming out, was the Blu-rays. The 6-movie Blu-ray set that came out. When we got that, we did a whole marathon, for all of us in the family. So it was an all-day thing just to do that, which is, again, there's a lot of movies and they all take a long time to get through. So you have to block out a whole day. But for me personally, Star Wars started out from when I was very, very young. The first Star Wars movie that I saw, because I saw them out of order, I saw Return of the Jedi first before I saw A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back. And I resonated a lot with Return of the Jedi for various different reasons. And then over time, seeing all the movies and then seeing them sequentially and then, understanding different things about them, I've kind of grown and evolved my thoughts and opinions about the whole saga, just in general, both before the prequels and then obviously when the prequels and the new movies came out, that evolved even further.
Awesome. And I guess for me, I just kind of like the movies just fine. I'm very much the outlier out of this. But it's always been a fascinating thing with me with Star Wars, as far as my friends, because I have a good amount of friends just like you guys. So it's just grown up with Star Wars, love Star Wars, and just been in the Star Wars. Star Wars has been their life since they've been born, more or less. And I've always thought of Star Wars as just this thing in the background where it's just it's something that universally everyone loves. It's just a something that, because I love the movies as well. It's just I'm just not in deep with it. But like until like somewhat recently, like I just felt like that's like a golden jewel that I could never really be tainted. Sure, we had the prequels, but like the prequels were like an acceptable taint. Like it's a weird thing to say, like even now, because like obviously like most people don't like the prequels. I don't really like the prequels as well either. But like there's still like you can still say like, oh, it's still Star Wars. So like people still have like this enjoyment even though they're so disappointed at the same time. I don't know, like what are you guys' thoughts on the prequels?
They're mostly garbage. I mean, Attack of the Clones is probably one of my least favorite movies ever.
Yeah, they're not good.
Yeah,
they're poorly written movies. I think there are like interesting things going on in those movies. I think there is cool aspects. I think Ewan McGregor is great as Obi-Wan.
Sure.
I love the Clone Wars TV show, and
Same.
we wouldn't have that without the prequels, but the movies themselves are not they're not good.
yeah.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, I think that the prequels, they have like little aspects here and there that are interesting that people gravitate towards. And if anything, sometimes I feel like it's more like looking for excuses to try and like these movies. But for the most part, they're not all that great compared to the original trilogy for a number of different reasons. And for me, I think that as you went further in the prequel trilogy, they got worse and worse. Now, a lot of people feel differently sometimes. They feel like episode 3 is like the best one out of the prequel trilogy. For me, I think it's one of the worst, most specifically for the beginning. And I think like as you go further back to like the Phantom Menace and stuff, there's more elements in that movie compared to the other 2 prequel trilogy movies where it feels a little bit more Star Wars like, and it feels like the writing and just where George Lucas's head was at was a little bit more of like making it into a Star Wars film, or one that like Star Wars fans would enjoy compared to what happened later on, even though there's stuff that people really love about the later movies.
I can see that because I think when you look at episode 3, especially, there's I think 5 lightsaber battles in that movie. To me, it like that's the memorable thing is just the action, I guess, aspect of that movie. I couldn't, like all the plot details and Anakin turning and whatnot. That's to me in my memory is secondary because of just how poorly written it is. But I guess I could totally like agree with you and think that Phantom Menace is probably written as the closest thing to the original trilogy in terms of a Star Wars movie. But they're just not great.
It's hard to like them. It's even now, like the thing is, like every time you pick out things that like you think are good and stuff, it feels like where you're looking for excuses. What really killed it for me as we got to episode 3 was the very beginning of that movie. Because if you guys remember, and I doubt anybody really ever talks about this, the droids themselves were more intimidating in episode 1 and 2 than what they were in episode 3, and they kind of just got thrown away as like as a throwaway line for why they're not in the original trilogy anymore. By one line that the Emperor says, it's like when you see that scene with General Grievous, after they capture Obi-Wan, Anakin, and the Emperor or Palpatine at the time. The droids are kind of cartoony. They end up being more cartoony by episode 3 than they are in episode 1 and 2. Like the droidicas, the super battle droids, they were more intimidating. They felt more kind of like what the stormtroopers were in the original trilogy. But by that time, they're more played for slapstick comedy, and they're kind of just goofy.
That kind of happens to the stormtroopers too, though. Like episode 4, we talk about, they can't hit anything, and then by episode 6, they're being beaten by Ewoks.
But there was more of a philosophical thing behind that, though, because George Lucas has always said that whole entire movie is about, or at least the original saga was all about man versus technology, man versus science and stuff. And I could kind of see where he was going with that, where it's basically nature versus technology like that. It's more natural elements, natural stuff with the Ewoks, they're using trees and stuff against technology, which is like the Empire, which is using guns and all this other metals and stuff. That I can understand, like there's more deeper layers to that, even though it's kind of shallow. But like compared to the droids, the way that they were handled in episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, it ended up becoming Looney Tunes, in my opinion.
I can see that.
But it's been a long time since those prequels, and like I think we learned a lot from them, especially in the newer movies now, one way or another, about like what people actually want out of Star Wars. And so like now that we have these modern movies now, like how do you guys feel about those, just in general?
I think I love The Last Jedi. First of all, that's the detail that I think really matters. I like The Force Awakens. I think it's very much retreading what A New Hope did. I think that there are things people blame The Last Jedi for that you really shouldn't blame The Last Jedi for. You should blame The Force Awakens for it, because there were mysteries that were set up that were just dumb mysteries. They weren't good. There was no good answer to them. But overall, I like The Force Awakens. I like The Last Jedi. I think Rogue One and Solo are not good movies, particularly Solo. Rogue One has its redeeming qualities. I don't like Solo at all. So I'm definitely in a boat where I'm like, I like what's happening in the mainstream trilogy. I don't like what the expanded universe, like a Star Wars story stuff, has been doing.
Interesting.
Yeah, definitely interesting. I agree. I think The Last Jedi is a really good movie, and that's kind of been an opinion that's. I remember watching the first night when I went and saw it. I was being very critical of it, obviously, because when you're watching Star Wars the first time, you have to be a film critic. Is what it feels like. And I just remember watching the first half of that movie, and I wasn't sure if I liked it yet. And the casino scene just happened, and I still really don't like the casino scene.
Agreed.
But then it just kind of clicked, and I was like, okay, like as soon as it hit that second half, it really started working for me. And then I saw it again with my dad. I took him, and sitting next to him kind of really let me see The Last Jedi the way I should look at it, which is it's a Star Wars movie, and they're fun. And my dad is the biggest child I know, so watching a movie with him is like watching a movie with a kid, and him being in awe of what's going on with The Last Jedi. That's kind of what did it for me. And since then I've seen it. I watched it last night just in prep for this, and I like it. Like every time I watch the movie, I like it more, and I find more things about it that I like it. And going into Force Awakens, that was probably the most excited I've ever been to go to a movie to see just like a premiere movie. And I remember leaving the theater after Force Awakens, and yeah, it is very much a close comparison to A New Hope, but it felt like what they had to do, especially after the prequels of them being so terrible and them, going off the rails so much. It felt like they needed to kind of rein it in and get back on a track where Star Wars fans felt familiar, and they felt like they, felt a little more at home. But for Solo and Rogue One, I like Solo and Rogue One. I think Solo is probably the worst, and I say that with like finger quotes, of the newer Star Wars movies, but I still felt it was enjoyable. And then Rogue One, once again, the second half, I think Rogue One is awesome. So.
Huh?
Here's the funny thing about this, because I'm on the complete opposite side of you guys on this. I'm the complete inverse, because I really didn't like The Last Jedi, and I liked it less and less, not only as the more I talked about it, but the more times that I saw it, and the more times I kind of got to observe a lot of different things here and there about it, even removing myself, or at least trying very hard to remove myself as a Star Wars fan of a very long time. And on the flip side of that, again, I find that out of the newer movies, that includes the 2 episode movies and the Star Wars story movies, I feel like Rogue One is the best one that's been handled the best, even though that's the film that had the most problems, apparently, behind the scenes on set and stuff, and the reshoots and everything, besides the stuff that went down with Solo. The thing is that, for me, I felt that The Last Jedi got caught up in a lot of things outside of what Star Wars is. And it's not about setting up the world. It's not about having the characters. It's about the way that they kind of talk to the audience. And I feel like it's the way that they present stuff to the audience, where it's not just talking to just Star Wars fans and whatever messaging they were trying to get across, or whatever stuff they were trying to show fans or people that stuck with it since Force Awakens. I feel like just some of the things that they were trying to present there, outside of like whatever mysteries Force Awakens had set up, they were trying to push things in a different direction. And that had a lot to do, not because of what was set up in Force Awakens, but because of what was comfortable with the director at the time, which was Rian Johnson. And I think a lot of that has to do with the behind-the-scenes politics of Hollywood, obviously with Disney. I mean, and I'm not talking about the stuff that you see a lot of crazy fans talk about and speculate over YouTube and stuff. There's a lot of crazy people out there that have like wild things that they say and wild opinions about everything that's been going on with Disney Star Wars, which I think it's correct and fair to say that Force Awakens and all the other movies are Disney Star Wars movies at this time. They're not Star Wars movies like what George Lucas envisioned them. They're a completely different thing at this point. But with The Last Jedi specifically, I feel like because there was a lack of direction from Force Awakens, there was a lack of kind of like meeting of the minds from everybody that was creating these movies, including the Star Wars story movies, that because of that lack of direction, or with lack of just syncing up with everybody, that it felt like they were throwing anything at the wall and seeing what stuck. And I feel like a lot of that was due to what the environment was at the time, audience members, and what's going on obviously in society now at this point in time, which Star Wars has always had a commentary on what's going on in current events and stuff, but it's not so overt and not so blunt as it's been in these last couple movies, and I would say that with Last Jedi and Solo. I just feel like the way that they've approached it and the way that they've let things go to this point right now has gone away from what Star Wars really was about, which was fun storytelling set in a fantastical space opera setting. And I feel like they've lost that essence ever since after The Force Awakens. I feel like Force Awakens had it, and there was a lot more intrigue. Star Wars had been away for a very long time and stuff. And I think JJ understood a lot of that charm, despite it being kind of like a copy of A New Hope. But a lot of that has been lost ever since after Rogue One, I feel like.
Do you have an example in like Last Jedi specifically that you would consider it being like pushed further, I guess?
Push further in what sense? Do you mean like push further?
Are you saying like, oh, the animal rights scene was messy? Because it was. I agree. Or are we talking just in terms of the overall storyline with certain characters?
I think it's a combination. I think it's a combination of things, because I think the whole Canto Bight scene, that whole entire scene goes nowhere, or the whole setting and all the events there, involving Benicio del Toro and a lot of the other stuff. And if you read more into the behind the scenes stuff of like what that was originally supposed to be, apparently, it makes it sound like there was a lot more thought process behind that, and all that just got thrown out. Whether it was Rian Johnson, whether it was Kathleen Kennedy, or whatever else, there was some stuff that was there beforehand that just wasn't. And I think a lot of that had to do also with the previous director. I think it was Colin Trevor that was supposed to do episode 9, that they were trying to set up some stuff. Again, have some sort of syncing between everybody that was making the movies. But I think it's more, in my personal opinion, again, even though it's a combination of different stuff, and a lot of people say the same thing, whether they try to criticize the movie or try to, praise the movie for whatever it is, I think it's more just the way that it talks down to the audience. It kind of talks down in a sense where the stuff between Admiral Holdo, the stuff with Canto Bight, the stuff with some of the Jedi stuff involving Luke and Rey, which even though I love Luke's performance in Last Jedi because it's Luke Skywalker, there's no other person than Mark Hamill that's going to understand Luke Skywalker with whatever material that he's given. But just the writing and some of the stuff that was kind of, presented in sequential event from throughout the entire movie just felt like it was really talking down to older Star Wars fans, and really talking down to fans that feel like, they want to have that same sense of fun and same sense of excitement that they got from previous Star Wars films. And it feels like The Last Jedi wants to take you in a completely different direction, or it's like the creators want to take you in a different direction for the direction that they want to go, rather than just tell a fun story and give something that audience members could really enjoy. Because let's be real, like a lot of the events that happen in Last Jedi, as much as some people might like them and as much as some people might have certain thoughts about them, they're very divisive amongst everybody, whether you're for or against it and stuff. And I don't think that really we've had that with the Star Wars franchise for over many years. Even with the prequel trilogies, we could even argue with like Phantom Menace and stuff, because people were very revisionist and very divided with Phantom Menace. But it wasn't to this point where I've seen it with, with Last Jedi, with Solo, with a lot of different things that are just, have more to do with other stuff outside of Star Wars itself. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah. I agree with a lot of what you said, but I also think that it should be stated that The Last Jedi, to me, has some fun. Like, I think there is fun in that movie.
It does
too.
have fun. I agree.
I think especially the very first scene with Poe doing the prank call, essentially, like it's a different style of fun. I think they definitely went for a more humor-based fun, but I think it's still there.
And I mean, like there are action scenes, and I feel like if you compare The Last Jedi to Empire Strikes Back, and admittedly I've not watched them back to back, so I can't say for certain. I feel like in terms of action-based fun, it's comparable. There's definitely more serious moments, like legitimately just really intense, serious moments. But there's also funny, charming scenes. Like even the Rey-Kylo Ren relationship, that's a very dramatic crux of that movie, but also a lot of their dialogue is enjoyable, like fun, snarky dialogue.
Here's the thing. Like I wanted the first couple times I saw The Last Jedi, I wanted to love that stuff, and I think that there are nuggets there of The Last Jedi that were good or could have been even better if they had gone and fully committed to them. The thing is that I feel like there's so much more for a fan like me or for other people that felt similar to me, where it gets kind of like pulled back or ruined by like the next subsequent scene or like other stuff that comes right afterwards or beforehand. Like, for example, I don't like the humor of The Last Jedi. Like, I think that a lot of it is very forced, and a lot of it is, there's an abundance of humor there, where it's kind of like more comparable to the Marvel films. Maybe that's just a style thing that was going on with Disney and stuff, but like Star Wars for the majority of films. Like, there's been humor in Star Wars. Like, it's not a foreign thing, but it hasn't been used in such abundance, like, compared to now with The Last Jedi. Like, obviously, the Porgs were obviously played up for a lot of laughs, you know, with Chewbacca. There's obviously a lot of stuff with humor with Mark Hamill, Luke Skywalker, and Rey when they're on, when they're on Octu, and a lot of other stuff involving Finn, and even outside of Canto Bight here and there. But outside of like those little moments that might have given me a chuckle or like made me smile or like enjoy stuff that was going on, there's just so much other things that I get caught up on that just happens before or afterwards that just ruins it for me. That just dials it back. Like, one of the things that I love that you mentioned before was the relationship between Kylo Ren and Rey. Like, one of the things that I felt that probably should have happened, which obviously didn't, but after the whole turning scene when was it when what was his name, the guy gets killed, that Kylo Ren kills. Snoke. Sorry, yeah. I was blanked out for a second.
You're fine.
Snoke, when Snoke gets killed and stuff, and you see Rey and Kylo Ren fighting side by side, that was the moment in the film, especially the first time I saw it, was like, okay, this is interesting, because to me, this is like subverting expectations in a way where it's like, oh, okay, maybe someone that's actually one of the good guys would actually turn the evil one to the good side, and we go from here. And what is the resistance going to react like when they see Kylo Ren walk in with Rey? Like, that's how I felt at the time. But then all of a sudden, immediately right after that fight, we go back to the position one right after that. And it's like, okay, it felt like there was something there, but then we immediately switched it back.
I don't agree that they switched it back, though, because I think that the old status quo where, yes, Kylo Ren had a level of power, but he, at the end of the day, served Snoke. And now where it's like Kylo Ren has taken charge of this organization, but he's still a child. He still doesn't know what he's doing. Is a really interesting story that they're telling, especially with the relationship that he now has with Rey, because, you know, they have fought side by side. They do understand each other. They have had this connection with each other. And now we're going to go into the next movie where Kylo is this still whiny child in charge of this entire army, and there's this connection that he and Rey have. I think it gives us a lot of opportunities.
You see, I don't feel that way, though. Like, that's the thing. Like, I wanted to feel that way, and I wanted to get something out of that from that scene specifically, but once all of a sudden he said, like, you know, to come with me, and after that whole fight, and it's like said, let the past die, kill it if you have to. Once you got to that stuff, immediately I just felt like it was a flip from another flip, and it was just like, okay, well, we're back to this square one, and now we're back to this stuff, and it's like, okay, where do we go from here? And I felt like it just was going in directions that just didn't have any sort of consistency, or didn't have any sense of direction after that. And I just was left like really annoyed at that point.
I think that comes down to a core theme of the movie, though, because the movie's major theme is failure. Like, the entire people complain about the Canto Bight scene and that entire storyline, and I have a lot of issues with the execution of it. But I think the overarching idea that that Poe and Finn set out on this mission with Rose, and they went and did it, and they failed, and because they failed, the rebels couldn't escape, because now the First Order knows they're escaping, so they start shooting them out of the sky, and they're being hunted to their last breath. And the whole story with Rey, where she thinks she can save Kylo Ren, and she goes and fails. I think that entire theme of just you fail and you keep going is really interesting.
I didn't get that at all. By the time the movie ended, I did not feel that at all, because the movie, tonally wise, just didn't convey that at all. Like, obviously, yeah, those things do happen, those events do happen, but I didn't feel that when I was watching it, because by the time it was done and over, like, again, a lot of people compare it to The Empire Strikes Back, and I don't agree that's a fair comparison, but by the time The Empire Strikes Back ended, and there was stuff that where the heroes felt their low point, you really felt that by the time they were sitting on that medical ship and they were just looking off into the distance when the Falcon flew off. You felt that. When this happened, after all those things went down, and Luke Skywalker is dead, a majority of the Resistance died and stuff, everything was a little bit hunky-dory, and it was like a little bit more happy, and it felt tonally off base, and I didn't get that same sense there. I didn't feel like there was failure that was the case, and I felt that was wrong.
But see, that's what I like, because The Empire Strikes Back did end on that note of, oh yeah, they failed. It's like Han Solo's in carbonite. Everything's bad. Our characters don't know what they're going to do next. And this movie wasn't about like, okay, let's have our characters fail and then the movie ends on their failure. It was, okay, these characters have failed, much like Luke failed, but they're going to keep going. The Jedi have not ended. And the rebellion has just begun. It is a moment of hope. It's that moment of hope saying, even in failure, there is still hope. There is still the birth of a rebellion. And that's what that final scene with that little kid with the broom and using the Force and having that rebellion ring was saying. It's like there are still sparks of hope. There's still a birth of a rebellion despite the failures that have come, despite the losses we've had.
That's essentially Leia's whole like shtick in the entire movie, isn't it? Where her and the Admiral are constantly saying, as long as there's like one person who believes in rebellion, it's still able to keep going. But going back to the Kylo Ren thing real quick, for the next movie, I really hope they keep diving deeper into this whole psyche that he has, where he's very immature, and I think he has that battle going on inside him where he's like he kind of knows that he's not this dark badass, but at the same time like he's just constantly forcing himself to make those decisions and try to become as bad as possible. And I just want to see him get unhinged from that too. Like, one
of my favorite lines I think in all of Star Wars is, it's so simple, but just as a screenwriting major, I love it. It's when he reaches out to Rey in the throne room and begs her to join him, and he just looks at her and he says, "Please." And he's just so broken and he's so desperate for a connection. Mm-hmm. But she can't give it to him because what he's doing is still wrong. And it's so good. It's so good.
Yeah, it shows that I think that shows that side of where he's looking for some sort of beacon, some sort of like reassurance that he's making the right choice by trying to become this dark Sith Lord essentially, and fighting his urges to be a normal person. Like he couldn't shoot his mom like in the jets, and then his co-pilots took him down, and then he just like kept going. He's like, good. Like I think we're gonna see that battle more in episode 9, and I can't wait for it personally. So.
I think for me, as far as like my point of view, as far as like the modern Star Wars movies, is like so like when I watched The Force Unleashed, that became my favorite Star Wars movie, and it still is my favorite Star Wars movie. Like as a casual fan, I feel like it does a lot for like I mean obviously like like the diversity thing which Star Wars always had, but like even more so in that movie. It's like that's been great. Like I love Red Up, and I like Poe, but I don't think they do enough with him to like make me really really like him. But like I still like him. But yeah, like I thought I still think The Force Unleashed is a fantastic movie. I never saw Rogue One, never got around to that, and like The Last Jedi, like it's weird for me because like it's one of those things where it's like where I think I enjoyed it, but it's like one of those things where it's like I don't know if this movie was made for me. It feels very much for like it feels like Rian Johnson was like I mean obviously he's a Star Wars fan, and he's like, oh, I want to put my interpretation of Star Wars, and this is the way I feel about it. Like it may be a different thought that most people want with this, or where they want to go with this, but this is where I want Star Wars to grow, and this is the movie I wanted to do that in. And like I felt that he did that, and it's just like like it just didn't really connect for like a casual fan such as myself. As for Solo, like Solo, I didn't really enjoy all that much. I enjoyed the last third of the movie was great, I felt, but like everything else didn't really like connect with me in that movie.
I have so many issues with that movie. On The Last Jedi, though, out of curiosity, were any of us alive? I don't think so, but were any of us alive when those original trilogy was coming out?
Not the first run. I saw all of them when they had the special editions, when they brought them back in theaters in the 90s.
Same.
Okay. So I have a theory about The Last Jedi and people's dislike of it. Mm-hmm. Which isn't to say it's like the only reason people dislike it, but I think that it does impact some of how divisive it's been. I think that people born after the original trilogy had already come out, so essentially millennials, our generation, and younger, we aren't really we're not mentally built for trilogies the way Star Wars trilogy is made, because a lot of trilogies tell stories where it's like, yeah, you have one movie and then a second movie and then a third movie, and they're all kind of their own story, but they're also all connected. Like How to Train Your Dragon is that way, where you can take each movie individually. Star Wars isn't like that. Star Wars is an overarching story, especially with the second movie. So when people watched the first trilogy, they had to learn to take new movies that changed the formula of what Star Wars is, because A New Hope changes drastically to Empire Strikes Back, and Empire Strikes Back changes drastically to Return of the Jedi. However, we have been able to watch the original trilogy as one collective whole our entire life.
Mm-hmm.
We just took it in as, okay, this is Star Wars. This is what the saga movies are. And then the prequels came out, but we could kind of write those off because they were bad. Like,
right.
Yeah, they have these good elements, but they're bad movies. So then Force Awakens comes, and Force Awakens is tonally almost identical to A New Hope. It's a very similar movie, and I understand why they did that. I think it was a smart move to reintroduce Star Wars with a very familiar feel. But the reality is Star Wars has to evolve. And I think The Last Jedi is the first main saga Star Wars movie that has changed Star Wars while being, in my opinion, a good movie since Return of the Jedi. And it hasn't completed the trilogy arc yet. We don't know how this movie is going to end. Or this series is going to end. So I just think that we as fans aren't really... It's not that we can't appreciate it. It's just that I think
we can't appreciate it yet.
I think it's that it's harder for us because we're not used to it. Like the closest thing to a trilogy on this scale that I've seen in my age is the Lord of the Rings movies, but those had the books already. So a lot of people already knew where it was going. This is the first time where it's like we've watched the second piece of a 3-arc trilogy and gone, I don't know what they're going to do with this. I don't know if it's going to work or not.
Like I recall, when Empire Strikes Back premiered, people hated that movie because of how it ended. Yeah.
So I think we have this very ingrained idea of what the original trilogy is because we got it all at once, that we're not used to not having a complete trilogy, and we're not used to a movie that changes what Star Wars is, even though Star Wars movies have changed what Star Wars is since the beginning.
I don't know if I can necessarily agree with that logic, though, and that rationale based off of other movies and other franchises. Because if anything, the only way that I think that could apply to some way is because now we don't get trilogies as much anymore. We get more anthologies. We get more beyond 3 movies. We get 4, 5, 6 movies, especially with things like Marvel, the MCU, the DCU. I think the close comparison, at least looking to that, where I feel like I don't agree with it, is looking at the Rocky saga, going from Rocky Balboa going to Creed and now Creed 2. Sure. Eventually and stuff like that. But I think it has more to do where I feel like we're a lot of us are still acceptable to change in tone if it feels like things feel like they fall into place where things feel like they're consistent or at least they're going someplace. And for me, going from Force Awakens to Last Jedi and stuff, I still feel like with all these movies that there's still no real sense of direction there, outside forgetting about all the stuff behind the scenes that's come out in the news and such. For me, even with seeing all the older movies and stuff and looking at the prequels and such like that, I still feel like these movies are still Star Wars movies. They're still set in obviously fantastical worlds, and they have obviously wizards, space wizards, and all this other stuff, and that's all great and dandy. But I still feel like there's still so many outside things that are influencing what Star Wars is turning in to be now for these new series of movies. That's why I feel like people are upset. Because it has nothing to do so much with what the context or what the content is of these movies are, what exactly is in those worlds. It's what type of messaging is coming from them that's coming from outside of what Star Wars actually is. I think that's where people have a problem. I don't think it's necessarily people want to hate Star Wars. I don't think that people want to hate these new movies. I don't think they're going out to hate them or they're that purist like that. It's just that's what I feel like the reaction is coming from these new movies specifically. And I think that's also a very apparent in Solo. I think that Solo is, besides The Last Jedi and all its stuff, I feel like that's where a lot of it has really come to a head, where people are really lashing out or at least reacting to it so bad from some of the stuff that's come out that again, characters like L3 that I feel like, are again, feels like it's talking down to the audience, and it doesn't feel like, allowing audiences to enjoy the events of the movie that's happening on there. That's where I feel like my problem and a lot of other people's problems coming from.
I also think there's one of the big problems that people have with Last Jedi and some of the anthology movies is that people, as Ben said, they've experienced the original trilogy as kids. At this point, they have that nostalgia, and they have this very firm thought of what Star Wars is to them. And anything that's different from that, it kind of for instance, Solo, it was a new take on Han because it was a younger version. So if anything that was different from what Harrison Ford did is not going to gel with these people, so they're automatically not going to like it. And there's definitely reasons to not like Solo. I'm not saying that there's only one reason, but I think a big part of the Last Jedi and the newer movies and some of the hate that goes towards them is that it's different from that nostalgia. Nostalgia is a very powerful thing.
You see, I don't agree with that.
And that's totally fine. I mean, that's just my opinion.
Yeah, I think
I just don't feel like it's all nostalgia, though, or at least I don't think a good chunk of it has anything to do with nostalgia at all.
I'm not saying
I don't
all
think
of it.
that's where a lot of people's ire is coming from.
I think there is a group of people for sure who are who are fueled by that nostalgia. Specifically, the people who want to remake the Last Jedi, like that crazy.
Yeah, I
group.
think
That's stupid. To me, that's just a loud section of people that are just trying to shout just to be heard, rather than actually having thought behind what their rationale is thinking. Like,
change
that'll
Mass
never
Effect
happen,
3
obviously.
But I think we're also in a
to me,
situation where we're
that'll
talking
never
about.
happen.
I think we're also in a situation where we're talking about like, oh, there's so much divisiveness in these movies. So I think with these ones specifically. So I think like yes, there's definitely valid criticisms of The Last Jedi, and there's valid criticisms of Solo, and I understand why some people will dislike the movie for like legitimately just the movie itself, like you seem to. But I do think that when we're talking about why are these movies so divisive, why are they causing so many issues, why is there so much upset, it is also valid to look at it and go, okay, there is the nostalgia factor. There is the fact that we've grown up with this very like solidified idea of what Star Wars is until now. All these things that when you look on the larger scale, you have the pockets of clinging to nostalgia. You have the pockets of I don't like the Canobite scene, and I think it drags on the movie. You have the pockets of I think there's themes that aren't properly carried through, and I think there's tonal issues, and all those pockets come together. But I do think the nostalgia pocket is a significant aspect to why these movies are being so disliked and divisive nowadays.
Do you feel that like The Force Awakens is like literally the cause of all this? Because like it played it way too safe, and like it kind of gave us the wrong implications of where they're taking Star Wars. Like, do you feel that way?
I think those expectations were there, and I think that's what was in part of The Force Awakens, like the fallout from that, because people had expectations, obviously, whatever the next film was going to be and stuff. And, you could blame The Force Awakens, you could blame JJ for that, but I feel like at least there was a starting point, and they started from there, and they were going someplace. But with The Last Jedi, I think that also, just besides the expectations, whether they were not met or that they were dissatisfactory and stuff, again, I just feel like it just got into other things that just were completely away from Star Wars itself.
I mean,
that's what the conversation became about.
I mean, sure, but like,
or whatever.
I mean, sure, because like, I feel like like I feel like Ryan Johnson, like when he saw like the Force Awakens, The Force Awakens, he was like, this is pretty much the same thing we've done before. Like, this is all old stuff. We need to evolve. We need to do something new, and like he wanted to be the person to do that. Like, go ahead.
I feel like Ryan Johnson was in a position where he's like, I mean, I assume he understood. He might not have, but I think it makes sense why they made The Force Awakens the way it was. But he watched that movie, or he read the script, or whatever he did, and he looked at it and went, yeah, we can't just make the same movie again. Like, we can't have this entire trilogy be the same thing. So I feel like he looked at a lot of the things. He looked at a lot of the mysteries that J.J. Abrams is known for being someone who sets up mysteries without having good payoff or any payoff planned. It's what he does. The Who Was Rey's Parents mystery is bad. It's dumb. The Who Was Snoke mystery, which honestly was more built up by the fans than it was by JJ, to be fair.
Yeah.
Like, it has no good payoff. Snoke, if you just keep Snoke, it's the same storyline as the Emperor and Darth Vader. If you answer Rey's parents are like someone important, it makes the universe smaller, and I really appreciate The Last Jedi is the first movie that didn't make the universe smaller, because, Solo did. So I think he just looked at that. He looked at The Force Awakens and went, I need to change things. And I don't disagree that there is a disconnect in the current trilogy where, like, there could probably be more of a through line in terms of what story's being told. The Force Awakens was a lot more action-y, fast-paced, and Rian Johnson slowed it down dramatically. So I'm very interested in seeing if they'll be able to close the trilogy on a rewarding note. I do have a concern that they won't be able to, but I think looking at The Last Jedi as its own film, as its own take on Star Wars, and as a way of dealing with what The Force Awakens set up, I think it's brilliant. I think everything, like the Canto Bite stuff, is executed poorly. I think everything with Rey, Luke, and Kylo Ren is perfect. I think it is perfect storytelling.
I'm on the complete flip side of that, and the thing is that I don't feel like you could really look at The Last Jedi as its own film just like that. It's because not only is it the second in a trilogy, but also again a lot of that stuff and the way it even starts out is completely based off at the very ending of the last film. And I think that while I agree it would have been nice, to again have a change of pace and a change of tone and a change of expectations going into the second film like that. That's what I think everybody felt like, after seeing Force Awakens in theaters and whatever Episode 8 was going to be at the time without knowing it was The Last Jedi. I think that if there was a lot of stuff where he looked at that movie or looked at that script and was like, okay, no, we got to really mix things up and stuff, I don't think it was a right call, or at least the right decision for him to handle a lot of the mysteries and a lot of the stuff that was already set up in the way he did. Because if that was the case, I would have rather him not address them and just let them still be mysteries.
Oh, I don't agree.
Film. I feel like a lot of that stuff, like, for example, whether it was Rey's parents, whether it was Snoke, whether it was the Knights of Ren, or any of these other things, I feel like that would have been the much better choice, in my personal opinion, to go about it, rather than the way that he did. Because obviously, the way that, Rey's parents is mystery, whether you like it or dislike it, the way that it's kind of thrown away, I think was kind of done poorly. I think that obviously not having the Knights of Ren there after they were clearly set up in the previous movie, like they're actually there in the flashback, but they're nowhere to be found afterwards. And then like some of the other stuff again just feels like it was just kind of like he looked at this as he was like, you know what, no, we're dropping this, we're dropping this, we're gonna go in this direction instead. And I think that was poorly done.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I disagree heavily on the Rey's parents thing being dropped, because here's the thing. I think if you just didn't address Rey's parents, I think that'd be by far the worst decision. That's ignoring what came before. Because The Last Jedi did not mistreat the mystery of whose Rey's parents were. Rey is a character who was longing for her parents to come back. That was her entire arc in the first movie. For her to suddenly just not care and be over it, that would be weird. For her to be seeking it out and for it to be manipulating, for it to be a force that manipulates her and drives her motivations, only for her to realize at the end that like it doesn't matter who they are, they're nothing, they come from nothing. I think that's more interesting because it resolves that mystery. Yeah, maybe not in the way that people thought it would resolve it in the way she wanted it to resolve, but it resolves it in a way that impacts Rey as a character. And that's what a good mystery and a good storyline does. It impacts your protagonists or your characters.
You see, I don't agree with that. I don't think it does, because in The Force Awakens, they even kind of set it up where she has a much more stronger connection to Luke Skywalker because of the lightsaber, that it was like almost hinting that that's her father. Like literally, they do that visually, and even Maz Kanata kind of like hints at it with what she says to her, and that completely is like almost retcons and complete forgotten in Last Jedi.
Yeah,
like,
because
and then no, I don't think it would be dumb. If anything, besides a lot of the fact that a lot of people thought that would have been a really cool kind of direction to go in, even though it would have made the universe smaller, but still, I feel like just that in the way that it was completely ignored and completely just dropped in Last Jedi, I feel like that in that case, then you just don't address that movie, and you still have it be what her motivation is for doing some of the things that she does without getting the answers in that second film, and then leaving it to somebody else to figure out what that actually might be. But I feel like the payoff and the way that we got that answer and the way that it was presented to us was just done poorly. I didn't think it was very good at all.
I think I see where you're coming from, JJ, because like I think you're saying pretty much as like you don't like the rules being changed when you're in the middle of a game, where it's like you pre-establish all this stuff and then like you're just changing it just for the sake of changing it, or at least that's how you feel.
I don't even think it's that though. I think it's the rules being changed, and I think it's also just things that are just completely just being retconned. Like retcon doesn't mean necessarily the same thing as the rules being changed. Retcon means it's like all of a sudden this kind of just didn't happen. That's being ignored. Rules being changed is like, oh, okay, like all of a sudden now, even though we've never seen Luke and Leia together training and stuff, now all of a sudden she can fly through space. I mean, to me, like it's things like that I feel like is bad, and I don't think it's handled well. Like to me, that's something like what in the pre-production phase that should have been addressed and should be like, no, maybe we should go back and rewrite this.
Okay, I'm gonna address both these. I'm sorry, John. I keep talking.
No, good. It's fine.
Okay.
I'm fine.
What was I gonna say first? I think that I personally didn't read like Luke is her dad as significantly as you apparently did. I feel like there was definitely hints that Luke could be her father. There were also people speculating maybe Obi-Wan is her grandfather, maybe Han Solo is her dad. So for me watching that movie, I was like, okay, they're definitely setting up a mystery of like who's Rey's parents. And there were hints, like the lightsaber was a hint, but I think you can just as easily interpret the lightsaber as Anakin was a super powerful Force user. Luke was a super powerful Force user. They both use this lightsaber. The Force connects all things. And Rey has now had the Force awakening in her, so she now has this draw to this item that has heavy significance to powerful Force users. So like if they said, "Oh, this is because she's Luke's daughter," I'd be like, "Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I saw where that could be going." But I didn't see them say, "Oh, you come from no one," and go, "Wow, this is retconning a clearly established direction." It felt more like, "Oh, wow, I thought this was going to go one way, and it didn't go that way," but it didn't break the rules and the story that I felt it had established.
I think after Maz Kanata said that in that line in The Force Awakens, after she said like, "Oh, it's passed from his father to him and now it passed to you," I felt that was a clear, direct thing saying like, "Okay, this is clearly Luke's kid." Because I think it was a lot more simpler than that. I don't think there was a lot of like, layers beyond that, even though there might have been red herrings for whether it's Han or Obi-Wan's kid or whatever. I felt that right there when she said that, that was just a clear direction of where we're going with this.
I think that could have been a clear direction. I just don't think that you can take that and say, "Wow, they didn't go that way." So it's I don't think that I understand why you.
The reason why I make it so much emphasis in it is because clearly that's a character that's saying that. That's because a character that's talking to the character, but also talking to the audience, though. That's why I think that's so significant.
I just don't think it's retconning. Like, I understand why some people might look at that and go, "Oh, that's really what I thought was going to happen. I don't like that they didn't do that," and I understand that. But I think it's equally as valid to say, "I didn't feel like that's where it was going," or "I thought it was hinting that was possible, but it didn't have to be that way." And that's also a valid interpretation of the story that was being told. So I get Rian Johnson looking at that and going, "Yeah, no, she doesn't have to be Luke's kid."
To be fair, there's also a part in Force Awakens where Kylo Ren like throws a heavy hint that Han could be her father too, and he's like, "The father you never had, right?" Like, like that whole bond between them. So I think the whole point of that mystery was like, I like what Rian Johnson did, and he didn't follow suit with the Darth Vader thing. Yeah. And honestly, like, who knows what's gonna happen in Episode 9? Maybe they do a turn on it or whatever, because we don't ever see Rey's parents.
I really hope not.
Yeah, I hope not. I hope not either. But I was glad that they didn't follow suit, at least in that aspect.
Yeah, what are your fears of Episode 9 now that like JJ's being the director again? And
I'm actually happy.
I think he's going to go. He's going to back. I think JJ's going to backtrack a lot, and the reason being is because I think a lot of the behind-the-scenes politics, with everything that's been happening in the news over the last couple of months since Solo came out, I think is going to be heavily influential on a lot of what's going on with that movie. I think a lot of it also is going to be based on the reaction that Disney's going to be. It's Disney execs that are going to be looking at the reaction of it based on what happened with Solo and obviously with The Last Jedi, in the conversation about not so much the sales, but the conversation online between the critics and the social media and stuff. I think that's what's going to dictate the backtracking with the movie with JJ. And I think that for a lot of people, nobody's going to be happy with this movie. And I think that's
why I feel
agreeing with stuff. I think it's going to be another divisive movie that everybody's going to really be turned off about. And then whatever comes after Episode 9, whether it's another episodic movie or another spin-off movie, I think that's when that'll probably be a much more better place where a lot of people are going to be more on the same page.
That's my greatest fear about like Episode 9 is like it's just going to be unsatisfactory to everyone because it's going to be too reactionary to what happened in The Last Jedi and what's even happening in Solo right now. Just like
that's what Last Jedi was. That's what Last Jedi was to Force Awakens. It was kind of reactionary when you really look at it. It's completely the opposite side of the spectrum.
Oh, definitely.
It's as opposed to being super safe, now is completely not off the wall, but like, changing things up heavily compared to last time. And
it sucks too, because I like I said, I really like these characters. I really like Finn. I really like Rey. I really like Kylo Ren. And like, I'm upset that the politics of that's going to make a potentially worse movie for me, who just generally a casual fan, just like enjoying these movies. So I don't know.
I'm going to hold out hope and hope that I'm at least find it entertaining. That's all I ask for, is that the movie's entertaining.
Yeah.
But like I also trust JJ. Like, going back to JJ real quick, I think he was a smart choice to bring him back. I don't like Colin Trevorrow as a director personally, and when they announced him as Episode 9, I was actually kind of really worried about that. So the moment they said he was out and JJ was back, I was stoked.
I feel bad the way they handled that, though. I feel bad the way that he ended up exiting and a lot of the behind the scenes stuff that came out about that. I think that's a real shame, because I feel like maybe without knowing anything of what he was doing outside of what was said in the media and stuff, I think he probably would have done an interesting Star Wars movie, based on what he's done with Jurassic World.
Sure, but I think Episode 9 and asking for him to take that monster was just wasn't smart when you had RDJJ, who I think from the very beginning, he only signed on to direct 7, but he was involved with coming up with that art for the whole trilogy.
Yeah, he was producing.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
I thought it was just smart to bring him back.
Another question I have for you guys is like, how do you feel about the frequency of like how frequent Star Wars is in nowadays? Like, do you feel like it's just being like smudged into the ground so much that like you can't breathe, and like does it not feel special anymore?
They're in total disarray. Yeah, it doesn't feel well. Let me rephrase that. Star Wars still feels special. I think that's more of the branding and really of the name. It doesn't matter how many times it comes out. I think there's still a charm there. What I think though is that they have very poor planning with the marketing of some of the more recent films to come out as of late, with the exception of obviously The Last Jedi and The Force Awakens. I think that Rogue One and Solo are really the movies that have suffered the most, and even stuff outside of the movies like Star Wars Rebels, Star Wars, the Clone Wars when that ended, and obviously this new project. I think it's Star Wars Resistance. Because the main problem is that Kathleen Kennedy and a lot of the other people outside of like some of the showrunners and the show producers and directors, they don't talk about those other projects. They don't even talk about the comics and stuff. And I think that's where a lot of the problem lies, because there's no meeting of the minds from all these different places. Because remember, that used to be the case with George Lucas, even with the extended universe stuff, where there was like a set series of rules, like where certain stories could be told based on the movies and stuff. There was a little bit of a consistency there, or at least people on all sides of the equation were paying attention to all sides of the equation. And I don't feel that with the new movies now at this point, and even some of the stuff coming out now on TV and other places.
They have a guy for that. They do. I know that they have someone. I don't remember who he is, but I know they have someone working in Lucasfilm whose job is to be basically an encyclopedia of Star Wars and all of the universe's lore, so that he can make sure things don't conflict, so they can make sure that there's a logical connection happening. But I don't know if the movies are coming out too much. I think that Solo coming out just after Last Jedi was a mistake. I think a year, like with a year division in between, is needed for sure.
Mm-hmm.
It should have come out in December.
It should have come out in December. I agree.
There is one benefit of Solo coming out now, though, is that I'm glad that we have 18 months between that and Last Jedi, because I feel like once I hit Last Jedi, I'm going to feel a lot more refreshed than if Solo would have came out in December.
That's a very good point. I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to burn out on Star Wars at the frequency it's coming out. I feel a little burnt out on Star Wars right now, but that's, again, because I have a lot of issues with Solo and Rogue One, where I feel like Solo especially, when Disney bought Star Wars, they bought a metaphorical like toy store of stuff. There's so much in the Star Wars universe. There's so many things to play with.
Mm-hmm.
And they just went to a corner of all the toys you remember and then kept playing with those and ignored the entire store worth of stuff they could be telling. So like in Solo, spoilers for Solo, I went into that movie concerned about the acting and how Han Solo would be portrayed. And honestly, I came out of that movie not really having that much of an issue with the portrayal of Han. But I had a lot of issue with the fact that in a 1-week storyline, you learned how Han met Chewie, how Han got his blaster, how Han got his last name, how Han met Lando, how Han got the Millennium Falcon, the Kessel Run, how the Millennium Falcon got so damaged, which I'd always just assumed was like, designed to show how much Han has been doing this job. But no, it's just because he did the Kessel Run once when he first got the ship. Everything about Han Solo's mythos was given to you in a 1-week story, and I have so many issues with that. Also, the Darth Maul thing was dumb.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that was the most random part of that movie, where I feel like it was stupid, and I feel like, because I remember reading someplace that was supposed to be the Emperor, and to me, I would have bought that more. Being Emperor, being the guy who's like right now in control of the entire galaxy at this point. But it just felt so random. And I think that if you never saw Rebels and you never saw that stuff with Darth Maul and Rebels, you would have never understood what that was all about.
Even as someone, I agree. And even as someone who has seen Clone Wars and Rebels, it still took me out, because I sat there going, where in the timeline
this happens before that in Rebels.
Yeah, no, I
it happens
know,
right
but
before
the
that.
problem was it made me question that. It put me in a position for like 5 minutes where I was thinking through the Star Wars, Clone Wars, Rebels timeline, going, okay, when does it make sense for Darth Maul to be leading this like crime organization? So it pulled everyone. It pulled even me out.
The other thing too, I think that was a clear setup also for whatever that second solo movie that they said that they were going to do that I might be on the back burner at this point, from my understanding, because that just seems like it was so random. And also the dialogue where he says like him and the girl are going to be working together a lot more closely.
Yeah.
It just felt more like a setup for whatever that next solo movie was going to be.
Yeah, no, that was very setup-y. It would have worked as like an after-credits scene.
Yeah, what I hope is if they continue that line is that instead of calling it Solo 2 or kind of continuing focusing on
Solo 2.
But I hope they focus, because they were talking about doing like the Lando spin-off and stuff. I hope that it's kind of like a trilogy between those three main characters, Lando, and then I guess Kira would be the third one. But like
Call it Chewie. Call it Chewie. He's the best part of that movie.
Chewie is the best part of the movie. Or they could just make. Oh, well, he's dead now, so I guess spoilers. You can't make Woody Harrelson. I mean, you could have his ghost. Find a way to give him a Force ghost.
They knew how to shoot first, though.
That's true.
Make him a host. It's a Westworld crossover.
The one thing though that I always was bothered about Solo though is that I always felt like in that backstory, whatever we got a backstory about Han Solo and Chewbacca and stuff, that we would see him working for Jabba the Hutt. And I know that they don't really name drop him during the movie, but I feel like whatever other movies they end up doing or whatever they had planned to do would have gone more into that, because at some point I remember reading that Boba Fett was supposed to be involved with this movie at some point. And some of the stuff was being more about bounty hunters than what we ended up getting with the smugglers at this point.
I mean, I'm sure there were a lot of ideas that were pitched around in the beginning.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. There's so much story that Disney could tell with Star Wars. We've seen it in earlier media, like video games. Star Wars 1313 was that really interesting bounty hunter game that did eventually become about Boba Fett, admittedly. But it still looked like a really interesting take on the Star Wars universe. And it was telling its own story. And I was okay with the idea of a solo movie if it told its own story. But it really didn't. It just showed us the old story.
Mm-hmm.
And they gave him the last name.
Yeah.
The last name.
Yeah, that was stupid. That was really stupid. He should have just been called Han Solo from the very get-go.
Within the Star Wars mythos, it's dumb because the way he got it stupid. The fact that he gave his son the last name Solo instead of Organa, when Leia's last name is the name of her adoptive family who died on her home planet, which also all died, is dumb. The fact that he's like, I have no people, I have nothing, and yet later in the movie references his father is... I have a lot of feelings about this movie, guys.
Yeah, that was very inconsistent. That was really weird.
But like I totally agree with you, Ben, as far as like it feels like they have so much opportunity just to like do something more with Star Wars instead of just being connected to this the Skywalkers. Like we should leave that by now. Like do we have to wait until this final episode before we can like actually do that with like Rian Johnson's trilogy maybe? Or
I think Rian Johnson's trilogy is going to be something completely different, because
I think it'll be special. Yeah,
I think he knows he has to do something completely different. Also, quick
sorry, go ahead.
Quick question, Ben. How did you feel about, since you're not a Rogue One fan, how did you feel about that Darth Vader scene at the end, though?
I think the Darth Vader scene by itself is incredibly epic.
Mm-hmm.
I think that Darth Vader's place within Rogue One narratively makes no sense. Like, if that wasn't Darth Vader, if that was just some random character, and you kill all of your protagonists and then leave that random character there, that'd be weird in a movie. It's only because we know who Darth Vader is from the outside and from like the original trilogy and the outside Star Wars mythos that we looked at that and went, oh, this is amazing. And like I looked at that and went, oh, this is amazing. But it doesn't make sense within the narrative of the movie. And you could argue that because these movies are all connected, you don't have to make sense within the narrative of the movie as much because we understand the other ones. And I understand that argument, but I don't know if I agree with it.
Sure. He does have a really sweet dad pun, though.
He does.
Exactly,
I appreciate that a lot.
But what I was getting at was like do you think audiences are ready for like a new Star Wars trilogy with like without being connected to Skywalkers and like even potentially not even having a lightsaber in it? Because like Solo almost did it until they showed Darth Maul, and you know. So, like, do you think we can have a Star Wars movie without lightsabers and whatnot?
I think it's hard to say that now with anything because, again, since everybody's so aggravated and sensitive at the moment at this point, because we've had stories in Star Wars that didn't involve the Skywalkers for the most part. I mean, we've still had Jedi. I mean, look at Rebels. I mean, that's a prime example. And we've had other stories and games and novels and comics and stuff that I think do work, that aren't based on the Skywalker bloodline. But I think now at this point in time, when it comes to movies that are being produced and put out by Disney and stuff, I think that a lot of people are very, very tender right now. And it's very hard to say whether they would really gravitate towards one like that or not.
I think it also comes down to when Rian Johnson's trilogy is coming out. I don't know if they've put any specifics down on that. But something that's kind of similar that makes me think about that is when Batman Begins came out in 2005, if you watch that first, I guess, teaser or trailer, I forget how long it was, there's like a moment where like it just kind of seems like a ninja movie, and then you don't really know it's a Batman movie until he opens like the cabinet and you see the bat suit and stuff like that. I think it just comes down to how they handle it, and I think people could look at it the same way as Batman Begins, where it is, as long as it's telling a new story, even if it rehashes old feelings and stuff like that, it could still be successful, but it definitely has to have some sort of fresh feeling in it.
Yeah, I feel like the Star Wars universe is so vast and like mythologized at this point that really there's so many stories you can tell in the same way that we have a million stories set in our universe, doing interesting things, telling interesting stories. So I think movies that are disconnected from what's come before, the more disconnected they are, the better chance they have of being taken well, as not being thought of as heavily like, oh, this could ruin Star Wars for me. Because like if it's in another part of the galaxy dealing with things we've never seen before, that's not really going to affect your appreciation for the movies that have come before, for the universe and the stories that have been told. That said, it's very possible that we will hit a burnout point with Star Wars before that happens because of reactions to Last Jedi and reactions to Solo, where it doesn't matter if it's set aside or not. People are just going to be sick of Star Wars. I could see that happening. I don't think it will, but I could see it happening.
Yeah, because like it makes me wonder. Obviously, I'm speaking from ignorance, but like, it's like, what is a Star Wars movie without the opening crawl, without the John Williams score, without lightsabers and stuff like that?
That's a problem with the newer, with the solo the Star Wars story films. I feel like, one, they should have had the opening crawl, and two, they need to stop mixing up the opening. I think that they have to have some sort of level of consistency. If you're not going to use the opening crawl, then do like what they did with Rogue One. Don't change it up with the whole dialogue or the lines of just, explanation at the very start of the film. Like, I felt like it was very out of place for a Star Wars film, even though, again, it's trying to mix things up and stuff, but it just feels like all over the place. Like they're just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what stick.
Yeah. I think having the crawl probably, I get why they wanted to keep the crawl to the saga movies. I think there could be good narrative cohesion the same way with the MCU movies. You have like the Marvel Studios lead in, and that works really well to get you into that mood of, oh, this is a Marvel movie. I think the crawl does the same thing effectively for Star Wars. So not having it in isn't. I don't think it's the best idea. I do understand it, but yeah, stick with the way Rogue One did it. Don't do that weird like place cards going in and out thing with Solo. That was a weird middle ground and odd.
Or the title, what they did with the title in Solo, I thought it was really out there and like really random. And it was stupid. It felt the same way. It wasn't as cheap. It wasn't cheap as what they did with Rogue One, where it just felt like they just put the text in the bootleg Star Wars type. I thought that was really stupid, but like it was like, really silly overall, just between both openings.
Well, is there any other you guys want to talk about as far as Star Wars, like in general?
I'm
pick each other's brains about something.
I'm real concerned about Disney's direction.
Yeah, me too.
Real concerned.
Just in general?
Just like and then in Star Wars.
Okay.
Yeah, like I like this saga. I've made that clear. I'm worried about their overall perspective because like the saga is connected to the original characters. That makes sense. Everything else is connected to the original characters. That makes less sense.
Yeah, you know something? I think this is what I could say about it. Because the reason why I'm concerned about it is because, again, I feel like with all the movies up to this point, even Force Awakens, which I like as one, that and Rogue One, I feel like are the two that I feel like are the better ones out of all the new movies that have come out. The conversation needs to be on Star Wars and the content of the movies rather than what's outside of the movies, rather than what's happening on social media about the people involved with making these movies. I think that's where Disney needs to really kind of, get a much more better grounding on when it comes to, whenever the conversation comes up about Star Wars. Because if you remember, during George Lucas's still like his whole reign over the IP with the prequels and stuff, even for the people that hated the prequel movies, it was still the conversation whenever it came up was still about what was in those movies. And it wasn't about George Lucas himself. It wasn't really about the actors and the actresses that were involved or all these other things, even though we didn't really have social media like that back then. I feel like that's a huge shift right now with these movies that I feel like they just need to get a better handling on.
Could Disney really get a handle on that though? I mean, short of just saying, "Hey,
I think they could."
I don't think they can. I think so much of it's just that these actors have social media presences and people are being very vitriolic towards them. So there's all this conversation of like, what is fandom? What are these communities, and how do you deal with this stuff? I don't know.
Here's the perfect answer to that. No, here's the perfect answer to that, because people have pointed to the DC, the DC, like that little like rule list or whatever that DC has for all their films and all their actors and people that are involved with the projects that they have. It's like a list of guidelines for when it comes to interacting with people. That's a fair comparison. I think it's much more better to look at what Marvel does and the way that they have their actors, their actresses, and the people, how they're able to still express themselves, but they're not condescending to the fan base and they're not trying to openly battle with the fan base. Because there are times where I see not just people that are involved with the movies, but even people that are just involved with other Star Wars properties, where I feel like they become just as vitriolic, if not more vitriolic, than what I see them complaining about. And I think that's a problem because, granted, there are crazy people out there. There are messed up people that definitely do messed up things that a lot of these people that are involved with these films don't deserve. Straight up, like that. I think we could all agree upon that. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, some of the stuff that I do see and the way that they do talk to just, whether it's on social media or in interviews and stuff, I feel like there needs to be a better understanding, a better conversations, and just a conversation talked about that at some point within the inners of Disney in order to get a better grasp on that, whether it's just, you don't necessarily have to go out and insult a bunch of the fans, even though they might not like your movie. You don't have to necessarily go out and call people white supremacists if they don't like Rey as a character or all these other, or Finn as a character. Like, I see stuff like that, and I think that's wrong. And I think that's where a lot of the focus of the conversation goes to rather than the movies themselves. And I think that's a big problem.
I haven't seen personally anything from them that I thought was too far, but also I think you have a much better, I think you have a much larger knowledge base of like behind the scenes Star Wars stuff than I do, so I'd be interested in like seeing some of that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll definitely show you guys sometime. It's interesting stuff because it really opens up, like, just obviously a wider perspective, but also I feel like, it has a better understanding of like what goes on behind the scenes at Hollywood. Because those are always constant problems that you see with a lot of different studios, not just big budget blockbusters like this. So you can even argue the same thing about Marvel, especially like with some of the stuff that they do with some of the IPs that they don't own and stuff. But I feel like it's still important to the conversation with Star Wars because I feel like that also has been influencing of where these movies are going.
Mm-hmm. Here's a question I have: why is Star Wars so sacred, though? Like, I mean, what's the secret sauce with this? More than like literally any other property out there. There's this it's so precious to people, and so many people as well that is like it feels like something that like you just can't fuck with. Like when the prequels were coming out and stuff like that, there was like a point where people was like. It got to the point where the prequels were so bad that it was like George Lucas, you don't own Star Wars anymore. It belongs to the fans, and like that's how people really felt because like you're just destroying what we love about it. And then like The Force Awakens came out again, gave us everything everybody wanted, and then like now we're divided again with the Last Jedi. So it's like what is it about Star Wars that makes it like that much special?
I think I got an idea with that, and you really have to look at another sci-fi property to really understand it. It's Star Trek, and a lot of it has to come from legacy, because if you look at what's happening now with Star Wars, look at some of the older stuff with Star Trek, especially with some of the earlier movies, and even some of the newer series now, between the whole Kelvin timeline and original timeline, and some of the new series out now, like not Enterprise, Star Trek Discovery. and stuff like that. There's a lot of similar parallels there, and a lot of it all comes back to legacy because Star Wars has been around for a very long time. If you take away the nostalgia factor within it, you just look at the fact that these movies and these characters and these IPs have been so impactful on pop culture in the same way that Star Trek has been. Those same problems still kind of like pop up on both sides of the equation. And I think really that's why a lot of people hold Star Wars sacred. It's in the same way that they hold Star Trek sacred, the same way they hold Superman sacred, and a lot of other properties that have been around. Even Doctor Who, you could even argue Doctor Who or Battlestar Galactica in the same vein, where they've been around and have impacted so many people over such a long period of time.
I mean, I think definitely nostalgia. I said it earlier, nostalgia. I mean, people have their memories with Star Wars, and they're all fond ones. Like I said, mine, where it's my dad and I's thing. Like every time a new Star Wars movie comes out, we go see it. We talk about it. We have a great time. Like people, they own their memories, and they're very special to them. So they feel like in some way that they get to say, hey, like in the George Lucas example, you're screwing up what we love. Like
Yeah.
Like I think that's a huge part of why people get angry is because of that nostalgia.
I mean, but I like Indiana Jones, but like I don't give a damn about Crystal of the Skull. Or...
I think there's a philosophy to it. Like Star Wars, Star Trek, Doctor Who. Those are shows that have a inherent philosophy and almost spiritualism to them.
That is true.
And I think that connects you in a way that most pieces of that you don't connect to most pieces of media. It's why Lord of the Rings is so beloved. It's why Star Wars is so beloved. It's why Star Trek is so beloved. I mean, I know it's why Doctor Who is so beloved because I have a deep appreciation for Doctor Who because of philosophical elements to it that kind of shaped me as a person. I think that's it.
It's applicable to everyone.
It's things that shape. It's things that are capable of shaping us. And I think with Star Wars specifically, like Doctor Who, there's so much Doctor Who content that you can have. Like there's still vitriol in that community, but you can have bad Doctor Who episodes and people are like, oh, that's fine. Or bad Doctor Who seasons, you're like, oh, that's fine because there's been so much of it. We're used to there being bad forms of it. And Star Trek's the same way. It was a TV show. There was good episodes, there was bad episodes. Star Wars was the original trilogy, and that was it for a long time. And then there's the original trilogy, and that's it. And there's the prequels. And now we're in the state where like there's a lot of new content coming, so it's starting to dilute what was once a much more like solid platform.
I think you also have to add into the mix the other forms of media, specifically with Star Wars, because outside of the movies and the original trilogy, we had the other forms of media that were the extended universe. We had the books, we had the novels, we had the comic books, we had the video games, we had the I think it was like audio programs at one point that they had that were like outside of like the movies, like extra adventures between the original cast, like stuff like that, which is also applicable to those other properties. But I think also with Star Wars specifically, that's where the majority of other outside stories came from.
Yeah. Like I've always said, like Star Wars always seemed like something that's like so sacred to people. It's just like obviously it defined their lives in a way, and like how they grew up with it, how they made them grow as a person, even take certain philosophies from Star Wars. Just like Ben says, like it feels almost like a cult in a way, where it's just like you just like when you're just like so into it, you're fucking into it, and it's like it can like change you how you are as a person and make you grow as a person as well.
Yeah, we have no experience with that, do we? We were in San Francisco for something.
Oh yeah, all praise you, hey. But yeah, I think that'll wrap it up for us. JJ, who are you? Pimp your shit, man.
Of course, yeah. If you guys want to check out some more of my stuff, check out some more of the stuff that I discuss when outside of Star Wars, you can find me on Twitter at VenomousFatman1 on Twitter. I post weekly on YouTube. My YouTube channel is my name, Jakejames Lugo, but you could also look up Gamers with Gains channel on YouTube, where I post up reviews on different games every single week, vlogs every single week, a bunch of different stuff that's on there. And then also I write for thecoalition.com. I do reviews, I do podcasts, I do op-eds, a whole bunch of stuff that you can find on the Coalition website and on the Coalition YouTube channel. So hopefully you guys can check it out and enjoy what you see.
Yeah. John, pimp your shit, man.
I host a podcast called Topic Thunder with my friends. It's a comedy podcast. We find dumb shit on the internet and talk about it. Like on our last episode, we essentially created a bunch of made-up history that goes along with absolutely nothing. And then I also just started a Twitch channel, twitch.tv/jfergieferg. You can find me on Twitter at Hangman522.
Ben, who are you, man?
You can find me on Twitter at Mr_BentoBox or at Mr. BentoBox on other social media platforms, namely Instagram. What do I do? Not that much forward-facing stuff. I am a college student who's trying to be a screenwriter. You can find me on youtube.com/MissMovies, where I work on 6 Degrees of Feature Film with Miss Movies and Stacey Howard. We are on hiatus right now. Will we come back? I have no idea. Keep an eye out for me possibly starting my own podcast. I've debated it. I don't know if it'll happen. We'll see.
Yeah. Is it the topic one that you wanted to do?
There's a topic one. There's like a debate one that I want to do, and there is another one that we really haven't quite worked out an idea for it, but I know who I want to do it with.
Awesome. Let me know. I'll give you your first listen.
Sweet.
And I've been your host, Brian Nabeshin Jackson. You can find me on at Twitter, Nabeshin186. That is Nabeshin 186. I do Rational Passions every week on Fridays live, and they usually post on podcast services on Tuesday. We talk about video games and other shit. And yeah, this has been Fresh Off the Dome. Thank you guys for coming in here. Like I said, Star Wars is not my forte, but I've always been very curious about the fandom of it, and with you guys being such diehard fans, this was a great discussion all around.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks. Yeah, this was awesome.
Same here. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah. And until next time, guys, we'll catch you later. All right. Peace.